Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We are going to be talking about NAV events today with our very own Brad Franz from Innovia Consulting. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody two things. First, we always record our webinars, so we will have this recording on our website by the end of the day. It's innovia.com. Second, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into that question box. I will get them called out and answered for you. So, Brad, without any further ado, I will hand it right over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Abby. Good morning and welcome to our webinar about what you need to know about NAV events. Abby mentioned my name is Brad. I'm a senior development consultant with Innovia. I've got more than 10 years of experience in NAV development. And as many of us know, when we're working with NAV, that experience has certainly not been exclusively development. Worn lots of hats in my time at Innovia and eSoftware Professionals in the past. Again, spend the bulk of my time today in NAV development, and we wanted to get this webinar together for everybody to dig back into this topic. It's actually been out in the market for a while, but we have reasons we felt it made sense coming back around to this at this point in time. So just as an introduction, interesting feature, compelling from my perspective, was added to Dynamics NAV with the 2016 release. Through the fall, through the conference season, and in a subsequent event that I attended with one other Innovia resource in December, this feature continues to get significant focus from Microsoft. Event is a technical feature that gives us the ability to customize NAV application behavior without modifying source code. Like I said earlier, events have been out for a while. They released with NAV 2016. There's already considerable information available online. Why are we doing this webinar today? Well, a lot of the information that's out there, there are numerous posts available from other organizations and development MVPs. Much of that information came out very quickly. It tends to be very technical in nature. As we've looked at this, events are likely the single most important platform enhancement to release recently. We're starting to see more and more interest around the concept of upgrading to NAV 2016 or later. We feel this is a great time, given that customers that are on a pre-2016 release are starting to explore NAV 2016, NAV 2017. This is a great point in time to revisit this feature and make sure people understand it as they're planning for those upgrades. So what are events? Oh, excuse me. Events in terms of NAV code are just functions that have some new properties attached. We have properties that allow us to identify a cal function as an event publisher or an event subscriber. And then we raise those events in code simply by calling the new function, no differently than we would have any other function in the past. I'm going to jump to the next slide and we're going to take a look. But before I do that, I forgot to mention previously, this is going to be a largely technical webinar. I am going to try and include some functional content and content that may be of interest or value to somebody that's in more of a business role than a development role. But we are going to spend a lot of time today in the NAV development client and looking at some CAL code. If that influences anybody's decision about whether or not they want to stay on for the duration. I wanted to give you that warning. We're going to be looking at code. So a publisher, again, there are really three components to a NAV event. There's a publisher, which is a function. There's a subscriber, which is also a function. And then we raise the publisher function by calling that in code. We use a publisher, or a publisher is defining something that happened in the application or within an object. There are great examples. We'll jump over and take a look at some of these. Great examples from Microsoft already in many of the, what I call the hot code units, 22, 80, 90, item journal post, sales post, purchase post. So let's jump over and look at a couple of examples of those. So here we're in item journal post line. If we design this code unit, and I am just going to drop to the bottom of this thing. Apologies, I did that the wrong way. We'll go a different way. If we were to compare this code unit, 2017 version of code unit 22, with something that predated NAV 2016, there's a line of code right at the top of the main section we wouldn't have seen in the past. On before post item journal line. If I jump to the definition of that, we can see that it's been defined as an integration event. On before post item journal line. And there are some parameters. We'll take a look at this in the variables window. Like I said, event publishers are just functions. And if we go find that one, on before post item journal line, and look at the properties, we can see relative to a typical function that's being described as an event publisher. And it has a type here that we'll cover in a little bit. Back to our presentation. We raise events by calling that publishing function in code. So sticking with that example, and we actually already looked at, we'll look at the purchase post code unit. So in purchase post, in the on run trigger now, there's a new line of code, on before post purchase doc. Again, we're calling an event publisher here. If we wanted to look at that one, we could go into our globals and into our functions tab. And we can look at the properties on this thing. We can see it's an event publisher. It also has event type of integration. If we jump to the definition associated with that call, one of the things we'll notice about event publishers, we're never going to see code in the publishing function. It's really just a technical structure. When we call on before purchase post, on before post purchase doc in code, this function gets executed, and deep in the bowels of NAV, NAV is alerted that this thing just happened. We're about to post a purchase doc. That leads us to our next topic, So once we've raised an event, subscribers take over. They respond to those events that have been raised. And again, a subscriber is just a function that we're going to use in NAV to respond to something that happened. Wanted to call out specifically, we can raise events without any related subscribers. That's perfectly okay. In a vanilla NAV install, if we were to stand up a base NAV instance in 2017, that would be happening all over the place. Whenever we post documents, Microsoft has added and raises events throughout that code. In many cases, unless we define subscribers, the raising of that event is effectively insignificant. Nothing happens. Let's take a look at an example of a subscriber here. So we're going to use this code unit that I created to support this webinar. And we can see I've preloaded this, with some samples we'll continue working through, but let's take a look at how we would add an event subscriber. We're going to subscribe to the purchase post publisher that we were just looking at. But I add an event subscriber. I'd go into my functions, and I would say I have to give my new function a name. I'd go to the properties on that. I'm going to say this is an event. Apologies, I have to try and move a window here. I can use my drill down. My options are either no, this is not an event. Otherwise, I can define it as a publisher. In this case, we're going to choose subscriber. We have to specify the object which contains our publisher. So in our case, it's code unit 90. And any given object can be publishing numerous events. So here I'm going to look up, because we specifically wanted to subscribe, we wanted to add some customization on before post purchase doc. Right at the beginning of the posting routine, maybe we want to add some additional checks. So when we select the publishing event, NAV is going to prompt us and ask us if we want to overwrite the signature of this object that we're creating. We'd say yes. And we're not going to cover these properties today. It'll be a future webinar. If we escape back to our code now, look at our code unit object. There's our new subscriber. And it's telling us this is a local event subscriber named my new subscriber. And it accepts a parameter, purchase header record. From here, we could add whatever custom code we wanted within reason, but it's really no different than code we'd have written in the past. What is different, and we're going to cover this a few more times during the webinar today, what is different is I haven't had to customize code unit 90 to insert my customization. I can get custom purchase post behavior without having ever had to touch that object or modify the base NAV posting code unit. I'm going to escape without saving, jump back to our slide deck here. So some specifics about events. Events in base NAV, there are 3 types of events: trigger, business, and integration. What we were looking at previously were, I'm going to call them user-defined events. Everything we looked at had a type of integration. There's a type we haven't seen yet, trigger events. So those trigger events are automatically exposed today by table and page objects. I'm of the understanding that we may see the addition of a couple of additional objects exposing trigger events, but as of NAV 2017, tables, the instant they're created, and page objects expose a handful of trigger events. Talked about before, integration and business are just 2 types of a user-defined event. We'll take a look at this example in a moment. Microsoft has been sprinkling, if you will, user-defined events into the base application code. Everything I've seen so far, every event they've added has a type of integration. I'm not aware of an event today that carries the type business, and there's a reason for that. Microsoft added that type property to our event declarations to allow us to distinguish. The idea behind a business event is it's something you're making a commitment or a contract effectively to never change once you have defined it. Whereas integration events, we shouldn't change those, but if I'm a developer and subscribing to those events, I shouldn't be blind to the fact that that event could change at some point in the future. So a business event, the developer is making a commitment to almost never change the definition of that event. I'm not going to add any properties to it. I'm not going to move it. I'm not going to delete it. An integration event, we shouldn't do those things anyway, but the integration type just communicates that a subscribing developer has some skin in the game as well. If you declare a new custom user-defined event in a code unit or in some other object, your event definition is going to default to a business type. You're going to want to remember to flip that type to integration, unless you can say, again, without a doubt, I'm committed to never changing this thing. So let's jump over and we're going to look at an example. Change my screen here. I mentioned that trigger events, there's nothing that we have to do to create those publishers. So we're going to add a new table. And I'm just going to save this. There's a single field in this table, code field. I believe I have that object number available. Hopefully I don't get an error message when I'm saving this. If I do, we'll look at a different object Oh, there we go. So there's our table, webinar demo table. If we jump back to our code unit, my new table should now be exposing events that I could subscribe to. I'm going to describe my new function as a subscriber event. It's going to be table 50,000 that provides the event that we want to subscribe to. Again, if I look up, there we go. That custom table we just created is exposing a variety of trigger events. And what you'll notice when you look closely at these, there's an awful lot of parallel between trigger events and the traditional table triggers that lots of us are accustomed to. We have things like on after delete, on after insert, modify, etc., etc. There's one other event type that I wanted to call out here. Table, without us doing anything, is also exposing an on after validate event. So in our new subscriber, if we say, I want to subscribe to on after validate, what we're saying is I want to tie into the field, the traditional field on validate trigger. So by choosing that one, I see a new property show up here. I have to tell it which field I'm going to subscribe to. In our case, our custom table has only one. So I select code field. And if I escape from here, we drop to the bottom of our code unit, we now have an event subscriber that is going to fire whenever the code field in our new custom table is validated. Nothing more I want to cover there just yet. I'm going to escape without saving that. Jump back here. Event definitions. Events can be declared with parameters. Trigger events, we get a couple of parameters whether we want them or not. We get rec, which is an instance of the table, or the table underlying a page object that we're subscribing to. And we also get past this parameter called run trigger. It's a Boolean variable. And what it's telling us, if we think about the traditional table triggers, on insert, on modify, on delete, when we call those traditional triggers in code, there's an optional parameter there. We can say I want to modify a customer record and I want to run the on modify trigger. Similarly, when we're modifying data in Cal code, we can modify without running those traditional triggers. The events are interesting in that they fire regardless. So if you define a subscriber, we're going to look at an example here. Whoop. On the customer table, this event fires whether or not, regardless of whether or not the source of the insert or the modification is the traditional trigger. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to comment that out for a moment. So in our code unit, in the on-run trigger for our code unit, we're saying insert a customer record. And notice what we're not doing is using this thing, which would tell NAV to run the onInsert trigger. I'm simply saying insert a customer record and be done with it. Now in this same code unit, I've declared an event subscriber. So what I'm expecting when I run my code unit, customer record is going to get inserted, and we should see this message pop up on before insert customer. So let me save this, and let's see if I'm correct or if I'm telling fibs. Whoops. I didn't actually need to do this from here. What I need to do is run my code unit. And there's our message. So our event subscriber is displaying this message, even though we never said to run the onInsert trigger. Yep, I know it already exists. Just to demonstrate this concept further, I'm going to uncomment this subscriber. Here we're going to use the run trigger Boolean that the subscriber receives to decide whether or not to show this other message. Excuse me. So if I save my code and I run the object, so we still see our on before insert. That was our first subscriber. And I'll get my error message. No second message. That's because our code said, what we're saying here is if run trigger is true, then show this additional message. So if I come at this a little differently through the user interface, there's our first message. Now there's our new message. The reason we see the new one when we insert a customer record through the NAV, the Windows client, or the true user interface as opposed to running the code unit object directly, pages always execute that on run, or I apologize, the on insert trigger by default. We'll look at that third message in just a second here. So there's our new customer record. Let's jump back to our slide deck. So those are parameters that are associated with the trigger event. That's what we were just looking at. User-defined events. There's a property that we can set to include the sender object. We can also define custom parameters that are going to be sent. We commit to sending when we raise the event. Let's take a look at an example. We're going to comment out this code for this example. I'm going to enable When we run our code unit now, excuse me, we're going to raise the on-run publisher, just here. This is just an event publisher that we've also defined in this demo code unit. When the code unit runs, it's going to raise this event, and down here we are subscribing to that event. We have a subscriber that will execute on run subscriber. Or I'm sorry, I apologize. Let's look at it is subscribing to my on run subscriber. It's subscribing to a publishing event within this code unit, specifically the on run publisher event. So we'll save this and run it, and actually we needed to add a little bit of code here. So there's our message. Let's take a look, one more quick look at how that happened. We said in our code unit, we defined an event publisher called on-run publisher. We said it was a publishing event. There's our type of integration. I'm not willing to commit to never changing this. And I was saying include sender. And again, the significance of that property, if its default value is no, if I flip it to yes, what I end up having access to in subscribers are the global variables associated with this code unit. This code unit provided a global function called just a normal global function that popped a message window. When I created my subscriber, my on-run subscriber, which is subscribing to the integration event on-run publisher, that publisher event was sending an instance of my code unit object where I was then able to refer to just a normal global function. Let's see. If we change our publisher, we reset that to the default value, the include sender property, and I save this, I should get a compile. I was expecting to get a compile error. There we go. So my examples, I had previously compiled my event definitions. So okay, I'm seeing what I did here. I created a second publisher, on-run publisher without sender, where we had left include sender at the default value. I subscribed to this event with this subscriber So now if I try to compile, we can see right in the subscriber definition, there are no parameters associated with the publishing event. Therefore, I can't refer to global variables in the code unit. Try to save this. It's telling me it doesn't know what this is. Excuse me. I want to jump back to our presentation here. Custom parameters. We're going to look at, let's see, we're going to use a couple of the base NAV objects to take a look at this. If we go into our sales post code unit, and we're going to take a look at one or two of the new event definitions, the publishers that they've added. Microsoft has added an event on before post sales doc. If we look at their event, see, it's a publisher, it's an integration event. Include sender is no. If we look at the local variables associated with that event definition, we can see when this event is raised, it's configured to take a parameter, a sales header parameter. So no different than what we have been accustomed to doing in the past. Event publishers can be configured with custom parameters. Let's take a look at how they use that. There's our on before post sales doc. When the code unit object is run, if we want to run sales post through the on run trigger, we have to send a sales header record. The first thing Microsoft now does in that code unit is raise the on before post sales doc event, and they pass the record variable to the event publisher. And here we see in their definition objects that subscribe to this publisher. So if we wanted to do something custom on before post sales doc and we subscribed to this event, we would get an instance in our subscriber or in our code. We would have access to the sales header record that is associated with the posting activity. They're using a single parameter here. On before post commit sales doc, we can see in this example though that publisher has been described to take not only a sales header, but a gen journal post line, code unit instance, etc., etc. The limit on parameters is no different than limits you've traditionally been accustomed to. All right, moving on. Best practices associated with events. In the short term, some things we want to look at doing. We want to create an event management code unit. Lots of the customer environments I see today tend to have a code unit that is associated with custom functions that customer may have found useful. We try to locate those in a single object, be able to better find them later. Starting out with events, that is a recommendation as well. Create an event management code unit. put your subscribing functions into that code unit. Integration. If we're going to define new custom publishers, remember to flip that type to integration. Functionally, business and integration type are equivalent. There's no functional, there's no technical difference. It's just a best practice. Use integration unless you are certain you're never going to change. And then local versus global. One interesting thing that we really didn't call out in the example, when we're working with events, event publishers and subscribers, those are both local events. There's no need no need to make those functions global. In fact, it's a pretty unusual circumstance in which we would want an event definition to be a global function. We probably don't want objects outside of the whatever object we are currently in raising events. We wouldn't want to have a publisher in the customer table that was accessible from something that was going on in another object. There's no reason for code in the vendor table to be raising from outside customer table events. But if we set the scope of our functions to global, that is what can happen. I've included a link here, and Abby, maybe we can answer this at the end. It's my understanding the PowerPoint will be made available in addition to the recording. Put a couple of links in here.
Get that to people if they'd like it, yeah.
Okay. Yep. So there are a couple of useful links in here, MSDN articles, getting started, and best practices. Something I have heard a lot of in the last 2 conference seasons. Lots of questions around the order of execution. I wanted to call this out today. If we want to start coding with events, the CAL language doesn't change, but oftentimes how we think about some of our customizations needs to change a bit. A publishing event can be subscribed to from one or many subscribers. Microsoft does not guarantee the order of execution of those subscriber events. I've looked at this a couple of times. There is an order today, and you could understand it if you configured multiple event subscribers to a single publisher. Today there is an order in which those will execute, but you can't bank on that. We don't control it. It could change in the future, and we understand that going in. There's a link to a pattern that we can use if it's absolutely imperative that the order or only one instance of a subscriber execute. There are things that we can do from a code pattern perspective to deal with that. But I personally haven't run into instances yet where I've used events and that truly is a requirement. Let's take a look at an example to kind of reinforce this point. No, we don't want to save that. Escape out of there. Make sure I've got the current version. Okay, so I have created 2 subscribers to the vendor insert event. I've named them somewhat meaningfully, yes. Show message on before insert vendor 1, and a second one on before insert vendor 2. We're going to jump I do need to make a change here just for the purpose of this demonstration. We're going to jump back into our Windows client. And insert a new vendor. There's my first subscriber. There's my second subscriber, just the way I wanted it. First one first, second one second. Life is grand. Let's look at these one more time. That's exactly how we planned it. We wanted this one to execute first, this one to execute second. They're doing that. But we've created a potential problem here, problem for ourselves. We have no control over why this one always executes first and this one always executes second. We can see that our demo to this point has been in code unit 50003. Another developer from your partner or within your organization comes along. They add a new code unit object, or they create a new subscriber inside of a different code unit object. I save that. I run my vendor insert again. Oh, now something is executing before that code I uncommented. Actually, in the previous example, and now we can see it's executing before our other on before insert vendor 1 and 2 subscribers. So just an example there to illustrate that concept. We don't control the order of execution, and we shouldn't. We're setting ourselves up for heartbreak if we're banking on that, if we're coding in such a way that we're banking on a particular subscriber executing before another subscriber. Apologize about the terrible image on this slide. What I wanted to show here was new way of coding. Just do a quick comparison. What we can do with these events relative to how we would have done it in the past. We're going to use code unit 414, release sales document, to illustrate this. I picked this one because customization in code unit 414 is common. Very typical that on a customer-by-customer basis, there are particular fields that they want to do a test field on before we allow a sales document to be released. Let's take a look at this example. We'll jump back into our webinar event management code unit. Let's see. Here's an example of a new way. We're subscribing to interesting. We're subscribing to something that happens . That happens in the sales header record, as opposed to code unit 4414. Well, let's take a look at what this mod would have looked like in the past. And for purpose of this demo, I'm going to comment out the base NAV code and enable this stuff. So this is an example of the old way. This is what we would have traditionally done. We find the spot in the base code unit that's doing test fields, and we insert our new custom checks there as well. Let me find a sales order that is open. If I release this, it tells me there's a problem. Shipping agent code has to have a value. Let's use the debugger just to prove where it is we are actually stopping, or where that error is being thrown. Let's run this again. We can see it's our old way of, our old version of the modification that's throwing the error. How do events benefit us? Well, what we could do today, we no longer have to put this stuff in code unit 414. Microsoft has given us an event. This is one of those events that they've sprinkled into the system. I'm going to save that. I'm going to try and release this sales order again. Still going to get an error message. But we can see where we're breaking now is inside of our code unit. It's within our subscriber. Notice all we did was copy our traditional customization in there. We're performing a test field and some additional fields. We've had to reference or call that test field just slightly differently. Use the parameter that's being sent to us. Other than that, code is the same, and the behavior is functionally equivalent. Even though in this example we would have removed customization from NAV's object. What else? I know we're getting a little long on time here, so I will try to get us through the remaining slides. Oh, here we go. So why is this approach better? Well, Microsoft is aggressively refactoring their own code. They're improving, they're applying these features and other patterns and practices, refactoring and improving the existing code. To demonstrate that, I'm going to show you a couple of text compares. On the left side, we have the code unit we were just looking at, release sales document. The NAV 2016 version of this code unit. On the right side is the 2017 version. What we can see when we look at this in this text compare utility, everywhere we see red here, this is a change in that object. If we just scroll through this a little bit, in the 2017 version, today there are 5 lines of code, actually 3 lines of code that we would see in the development environment in the on-run trigger. As recently as NAV 2016, there was a whole lot of code in on-run. If we had customization in this section of code in our current NAV environment, and we were trying to upgrade to NAV 2017, we now have to figure out where does that customization go. None of this code that we are actually looking at exists any longer in the same location. So if there were a mod here, a developer is going to have to physically look at the 2017 version of the object and figure out where has all of this stuff now been moved to, and they would have to manually pull that customization into 2017. Or understanding that event publishers have been sprinkled into the object, I could figure out where does this customization really belong? And can I accomplish the same behavior by tying in subscribing to an event that's been added to this code unit? Get my customization out of the base NAV object. One other quick example. Code unit 80, sales post. On the left side, 2016. On the right side, 2017. The 2016 version of the code unit is even one of the later cumulative updates. Look at all of the red. Again, these are base NAV objects and a code unit in particular that tends to contain a lot of customization. On the one hand, this causes us some stress, right? This creates challenges for our traditional upgrade. But the reason that we're seeing all of this difference, it is improving the product. And we've been given a technical feature that greatly reduces our need in most scenarios to actually modify that base code unit. Just forces us to maybe rethink some of our customizations or think a little bit differently about how we would accomplish that customization. We take advantage of events. We can greatly reduce or even eliminate our need for code merge going forward. A couple of other benefits I wanted to show about why this is better. Our modification, if we can move our modification to events, and we apply some of those best practices, the customization in our system literally becomes, particularly code customization, becomes self-documenting. If we want to understand what has been modified in our system, we go to our event management code unit, we design it, and we can say, oh, I see I'm doing something, I'm subscribing, I'm showing a message on before post purchase doc, I'm showing a message on before insert customer. This code unit is essentially documenting what we've customized in our system. There's another way for us to get at that information. There's a page you won't find on a menu or in the search bar, but there's a page that also shows us this information. Event subscriptions. If I run that page, what this page is showing us is an underlying table with the same name, but it's showing us the linkage between a publisher and a subscriber. And again, if we wanted to locate our customization, I could filter this page for my event management code unit. And here's my customization. I'm subscribing to something that happens in table 36, something associated with a customer. Here's what I'm subscribing to, and again, the location. There's the literal function and the object it's located in. So my NAV environment is pre-2016. What can I do with all of this? Well, review the current system. Let's try to understand what is currently customized. With that understanding, a combination of knowing what's been customized in our system and what is available in the latest versions of NAV, we can make some determinations. Maybe we don't need some of that customization anymore, and it can just be dropped in a future upgrade. Maybe we want to retain some of that customization, but we want to rework it. We want to get it ready for the feature, the technical feature we know is going to be out there. That can happen. Existing customizations could be or can be refactored and structured much like the events that will become available later. One other comment about refactoring. If we weren't sure when we were going to upgrade, we were certain we had customizations we wanted to bring forward, and we wanted to refactor it in such a way that we could potentially easily move it into events in the future version. That work can be tackled object by object rather than in a big bang. You can do it incrementally. You got a customization in the customer table. On Monday you can deal with just that. And you literally could test it, deploy that into your live environment if it was working properly. 3 days later, you could take on the next object, even if both objects were related to the same original customization request. We've got an example in our objects, and I'm going to skip that just in the interest of time to show what that would look like. I'll do that at the end of the presentation for anybody that wants to stay on. So summary, lots to learn, lots to think about. Events, they're new technical feature, a relatively new technical feature. Microsoft themselves are taking advantage of it, but it's been added, and it can help us help ourselves relative to this traditional upgrade headache that customized environments encounter. We need to understand it. Microsoft is aggressively refactoring and improving their own code. They're anticipating that we're going to do the same. Last thing, in terms of code customization, events are the gateway to this whole extension thing that people have probably been hearing about. I have a very simple example to show that. But until we start moving our customization into events and out of base nav objects, particularly code customization, deployment via extension is something that won't be available to us. So let's look at this last example here. Right now we're looking at our customer list. Right? We can see the columns. We've got number, sell to customer number, traditional columns. I've created a super simple, almost embarrassingly simple extension. I'm going to install it. Okay, my extension is now installed. It's telling me I have to close and reopen my Windows client to see that. I know what my extension is affecting. I'm going to run my customer list page specifically. We can see here there's no modification to that page. When our list page comes up now, there is clearly a custom column being presented. So I wanted to show that. Events are the key to being able to take advantage of deployment via extension at some point in the future. Extensions will be the topic of a future webinar, not too distant future, from Innovia as well. So with that, Abby, that is it for me. Do we have any questions?
We haven't gotten any questions at this point, Brad. If anybody has any questions, of course, they can type them in. I know that we're running late, so we're probably going to just speed through the end here. Going to remind everybody that we recorded our webinar, so we're going to have it up by the end of the day on our website. That's innovia.com. And Brad, no questions right now.
Okay.
Well, we thank everybody for attending, and we are looking forward to seeing you on our next webinar.